The silk negligee lay crumpled on the marble floor of their penthouse bathroom, and Victor Dane stood frozen in the doorway, watching his wife of 3 years adjust her lipstick in the mirror, while a stranger's cologne still lingered in the air. Chloe had always been a master of reinvention, but Victor didn't understand the depth of her artistry until their first spring together. As husband and wife, she emerged from winter's hibernation like a butterfly from its cocoon, trading her cocktail dresses for flowing yoga pants and her martinis for green smoothies. The transformation was so complete, so convincing, that even Victor began to believe this earth goddess version of his wife was the real Chloe. She converted their guest bedroom into a meditation sanctuary, complete with singing bowls and crystals that caught the morning light, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Every dawn found her there, legs folded in perfect lotus position, her breathing so serene it seemed to slow time itself. Victor would watch from the doorway, mesmerized by this creature who bore little resemblance to the ambitious socialite he'd married. "Namaste, darling," she would whisper, opening eyes that sparkled with newfound wisdom. Her voice carried the kind of peace that money couldn't buy, and Victor felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the corporate armor he'd worn for 30 years in the hotel business. The yoga instructor, Devin, arrived 3 times a week at precisely 7 in the morning. He was everything Victor wasn't: flexible, spiritual. 28 years old, with the kind of lean muscle that came from mindful movement rather than boardroom stress. Chloe glowed during their sessions, her laughter rippling through the penthouse like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Victor tried to join them once, his 50-year-old body protesting every pose, while Chloe and Devin flowed together like water finding its path. Their synchronicity was beautiful and terrible to witness, 2 souls moving as one. While Victor struggled to touch his toes, he retreated to his office, telling himself it was just exercise, just another phase in his wife's endless cycle of self-improvement. But the text messages on Chloe's phone told a different story. Victor discovered them by accident one evening when she left her device charging in the kitchen. The screen lit up with notifications from Devin, and the preview showed words that made Victor's blood run cold. "Your husband doesn't understand your true nature like I do." That night, Chloe slept peacefully beside him, her face serene in the moonlight filtering through their bedroom windows. Victor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when his fairy tale had become someone else's love story. The woman next to him breathed with the rhythm of ocean waves, and he realized he no longer knew which version of Chloe was dreaming behind those closed eyelids. Spring gave way to summer with the cruel indifference of time, and Chloe began her next metamorphosis. The yoga mats disappeared, replaced by nutrition books and juicing equipment. Devin stopped coming to the penthouse, and Victor never asked why. Some truths were too sharp to grasp directly. By June, Chloe had shed her spiritual seeker persona like a snake discarding old skin. The meditation room became her wellness laboratory, filled with supplements, essential oils, and a collection of superfoods that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She glowed with the fervor of the converted, preaching the gospel of clean living to anyone within earshot. Victor watched this transformation with the same fascination and unease he'd felt during her yoga phase. Chloe attacked wellness with the intensity of a military campaign, tracking every macro and micronutrient, scheduling colonics like board meetings, and turning their kitchen into a temple of organic perfection. The woman who had once lived on champagne and canapes now spoke reverently of chlorophyll and adaptogenic herbs. Her new guru was Dr. Marcus Webb, a naturopath with silver hair and hands that lingered too long when he demonstrated acupressure points. He visited their penthouse twice weekly for consultations, arriving with leather bags full of mysterious tinctures and an unsettling intensity that made Victor's skin crawl. But Chloe hung on his every word, nodding eagerly as he explained the spiritual significance of liver cleanses and the sexual energy stored in green vegetables. "Your wife has a very sensitive constitution," Dr. Webb told Victor during one encounter in the hallway. "She requires special attention to achieve optimal vitality." His smile was practiced, professional, but his eyes held something predatory that made Victor want to check the locks on their bedroom door. The dinner parties that summer became showcases for Chloe's latest obsession, She served elaborate raw food sculptures that looked like art installations and tasted like expensive grass. Their guests powerful hotel executives, socialites, politicians pushed the creations around their plates, while Chloe explained the consciousness-raising properties of sprouted mung beans. Victor found himself ordering room service after these gatherings, hiding in his home office with a burger and fries while his wife detoxed their marriage one meal at a time. The distance between them grew with each passing day, measured in superfoods and silent dinners where Chloe studied her phone instead of meeting his eyes. The breaking point came in late August. Victor returned early from a business trip to find Chloe and Dr. Webb in their living room, her dress rumpled and his hands still resting on her bare shoulders. They jumped apart like teenagers caught necking, and Chloe's face cycled through surprise, guilt, and finally that practiced smile that had charmed him at a charity gala 4 years ago. "Darling, you're early," she said, smoothing her hair with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Marcus was just adjusting my chakras. I've been having the most terrible energy blockages." Dr. Webb gathered his supplies with unseemly haste, muttering about emergencies and other clients. Victor stood in his own doorway, feeling like an intruder in the life he'd built and paid for. After the naturopath left, Chloe busied herself in the kitchen, humming while she prepared one of her ghastly green smoothies as if nothing had happened. That night, she made love to him with an intensity that felt almost desperate, whispering about energy and connection and the healing power of physical union. Victor lost himself in her performance, allowing her body to rewrite the narrative his eyes had witnessed. In the darkness, it was easy to pretend that passion could erase betrayal, that desire could overcome deception. But morning brought clarity, and with it, the recognition that his wife was not the wellness goddess she portrayed. She was an actress, and he was her most devoted audience member, applauding even when the play broke his heart. September arrived with the brutal efficiency of changing seasons, and Chloe discarded her wellness persona as easily as she'd abandoned her spiritual phase. The supplements disappeared, replaced by towering stacks of literary classics and philosophical treatises. She joined 3 book clubs simultaneously, transforming their penthouse into a salon where intellectual discourse flowed as freely as the wine. She'd returned to drinking. Victor watched this latest reinvention with weary fascination. Gone was the green juice devotee, replaced by a woman who quoted Sartre over breakfast and debated Faulkner's narrative techniques with anyone brave enough to engage. She wore wire-rimmed glasses, now purely aesthetic, since her vision was perfect, and favored flowing scarves that made her look like a bohemian professor despite never having set foot in a university. Classroom. The book clubs met in rotation throughout the week. Mondays brought the Contemporary Fiction Society, a group of museum board members and gallery owners who discussed novels with the same intensity they once reserved for stock portfolios. Wednesdays welcomed the Philosophy Circle, where Chloe held court among retired professors and trust fund intellectuals, her insights delivered with the confidence of someone who'd discovered wisdom in the pages of books rather than the messiness of lived experience. But it was Thursday's poetry collective that concerned Victor most. Led by a visiting professor named Jonathan Ashford, the group consisted mainly of younger artists and writers who looked at Chloe with the kind of hungry admiration usually reserved for patrons of the arts. Jonathan himself was everything Victor expected from an academic: rumpled tweeds, unruly hair, and the kind of passionate intensity that made ordinary conversation feel like foreplay. Victor tried to participate, purchasing leather-bound editions of classics and attempting to join their discussions. But his contributions felt clumsy and commercial beside Chloe's elegant analysis. She had a gift for making literature sound like prophecy, for finding hidden meanings in simple sentences that escaped his businessman's pragmatism. "You see, darling," she explained one evening after the poetry collective had departed, "Victor reads for information, but great literature requires reading for transformation. It's about allowing the words to change your very essence." Her condescension stung, but not as much as the way Jonathan's eyes followed her movements during their gatherings, or how she lingered over his contributions to their discussions, her voice taking on a breathless quality that Victor recognized from their early courtship. The professor was married, a fact Chloe mentioned frequently, as if his unavailability made their intellectual connection more pure, more elevated above base desires. The affair began, Victor was certain, during their October discussion of Anna Karenina. The irony wasn't lost on him that his wife chose Tolstoy's greatest adulteress as her inspiration. He returned from a weekend business conference to find Chloe glowing with the particular radiance that came from secrets and satisfaction. The poetry evening was extraordinary, she told him, unpacking her weekend purchases: books, expensive wine, a silk scarf that looked suspiciously like the one he'd seen draped over Jonathan's office chair. During a chance encounter at the university, we discussed the intersection of desire and destruction in romantic literature. So illuminating. Her performance that night was Oscar-worthy, the devoted wife sharing her intellectual adventures with her beloved husband, completely innocent of any impropriety. But Victor had learned to read between the lines of his wife's stories, to recognize the careful omissions and artful redirections that concealed her true activities. He hired a private investigator discreetly, professionally, the way he handled all unpleasant business matters. The photographs arrived a week later, Chloe and Jonathan in his cramped faculty apartment, their bodies intertwined on his academic's sofa, surrounded by towers of books and empty wine bottles. They looked like characters from one of the romantic tragedies she'd become so fond of analyzing. Confronting her felt pointless. Chloe would simply reinvent the narrative, transforming adultery into a meeting of minds, betrayal into a higher form of love that transcended conventional morality. She had become expert at justifying her desires with philosophical frameworks that made resistance seem small-minded and bourgeois. Instead, Victor waited, watching his wife's performance with the detached appreciation of a critic reviewing a familiar play. Soon enough, winter would come, and with it, another transformation. The only question was what character she would choose to inhabit next, and whether he would still have the strength to be her audience. December swept into their lives, with Chloe's most dramatic transformation yet. The intellectual disappeared overnight, replaced by a glittering socialite who treated their penthouse like a stage, and every gathering like an opening night. She commissioned interior designers to transform their home into a winter wonderland of crystal and silver, where champagne flowed like water and conversation sparkled with the sharp wit of the professionally charming. Victor recognized this version of his wife. It was the woman he'd fallen in love with at that charity gala 4 years ago, when her laughter had cut through a room full of corporate small talk like a blade through silk. But now her performance felt calculated, each gesture rehearsed for maximum impact. She'd learned to weaponize her charm, and Victor wasn't sure if he was her ally or her target. The cocktail parties began in earnest. After New Year's, elaborate affairs that showcased Chloe's gift for orchestrating human chemistry. She curated her guest lists like a master sommelier, selecting wines, mixing business leaders with artists, politicians with socialites, creating combinations that generated the kind of electric energy that made people feel alive and important and slightly dangerous. She presided over these gatherings like a conductor leading an orchestra, knowing exactly when to introduce controversial topics, when to refresh drinks, when to deploy her most devastating smile to diffuse tension or create it. Men orbited around her like planets around the sun, and she basked in their attention with the satisfied air of someone who'd discovered her true calling. Victor watched it all from the edges, playing the role of the successful older husband who'd won the lottery of beautiful wives. The guests treated him with the respectful condescension reserved for those who possessed what they desired, but couldn't truly appreciate. He was the setting that made Chloe's diamond brilliance possible, valuable but ultimately secondary to the main attraction. The bartender was named Alessandro, a sculptor moonlighting in mixology to pay for his art supplies. He had the kind of Mediterranean good looks that made sophisticated women forget their marriages, and hands that moved with artistic precision, whether crafting cocktails or, Victor suspected, exploring other forms of creative expression. Chloe hired him after their first party, claiming his mojitos were transcendent. But Victor noticed how her fingers lingered when she handed him payment, how their conversations about art stretched long after the last guest departed. Alessandro understands the aesthetics of desire, Chloe explained one morning as they reviewed plans for their next gathering. Creating the perfect cocktail is like creating the perfect moment. It requires intuition, timing, and just the right touch of passion. Her words dripped with double meaning, and Victor felt the familiar knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This dance was becoming routine. Chloe would reinvent herself, attract a new paramour suited to her latest persona, and Victor would play the oblivious husband until the evidence became too obvious to ignore. The end came during their Valentine's Day party, an intimate gathering of 20 couples celebrating love and luxury in equal measure. Victor returned from his study to find the living room empty except for Chloe and Alessandro, who were engaged in what looked like a vertical interpretation of horizontal desires. Against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, they broke apart with the practiced speed of those accustomed to close calls, but not quickly enough to hide the evidence of their intimate choreography. Chloe's lipstick was smeared, her dress askew, and Alessandro's bow tie hung loose around his neck like a surrender flag. "Darling," Chloe's voice carried its usual bright notes, but her breathing was uneven, her cheeks flushed with more than wine. Alessandro was just showing me a new mixing technique. Very hands-on instruction. The bartender gathered his equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd made similar exits before, and Victor found himself alone with his wife in their glittering palace of pretense. Chloe poured herself a generous glass of champagne and settled onto their white leather sofa. As if nothing had happened, her legs crossed with calculated elegance. "You know," she said, swirling the champagne in her glass, "I've been thinking we should travel this spring, somewhere warm, where we can rediscover ourselves. Maybe I'll take up pottery or learn to paint watercolors." Already, Victor could see her planning the next act, the next character, the next performance. And despite everything, the betrayals, the lies, the casual destruction of his trust, he felt the familiar pull of her gravity. She was preparing to transform again, to become someone new and wonderful and devastating, and he would watch it happen because he couldn't bring himself to look away. Spring returned with its inevitable promise of renewal, but Victor felt only the weight of repetition as he watched Chloe begin her metamorphosis. Once again, this time, she gravitated toward photography, filling their penthouse with expensive equipment and art books, speaking passionately about light and shadow and the raw truth that only a camera could capture. The irony of his wife, a master of deception, pursuing a medium dedicated to revealing reality, was not lost on him. The photographer she chose as her mentor was predictably perfect for the role. Damian Cross, a brooding artist in his 30s, whose black and white portraits graced gallery walls across the city. He arrived for their first session wearing paint-stained jeans and an intensity that made Victor's business suits feel like armor. Chloe greeted him with the breathless enthusiasm she reserved for new obsessions, her eyes bright with the particular hunger that preceded her affairs. Victor had reached his breaking point somewhere between winter's bartender and spring's artist. 3 years of seasons, 3 years of reinventions, 3 years of watching his wife seduce her way through a catalog of professions and personas. The pattern had become as predictable as the changing weather, and just as unstoppable. "We need to talk," he told her one evening after Damien had left. His camera equipment scattered across their living room like the remnants of an artistic explosion. Chloe was reviewing the day's shots on her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow as she studied images of herself with the concentration of a scientist examining specimens. "About what, darling?" she asked without looking up, her voice carrying that distracted tone she used when she was already mentally elsewhere, already planning her next move in whatever game she was playing. "About us, about this marriage, about what you've been doing with every instructor, every teacher, every mentor you've brought into our home." The words hung in the air between them like smoke, and for a moment, Victor thought he might have finally penetrated the elaborate facade she'd constructed around their relationship. But Chloe simply closed the laptop and turned to face him, with the patient expression of someone explaining simple concepts to a confused child. "Victor, darling, I think you're letting your imagination run away with you," she said, her voice soft with manufacture-red concern. "These are learning experiences, opportunities for growth and self-discovery. If you're feeling insecure about my pursuits, I hired investigators, he interrupted, the words leaving his mouth before he could consider their consequences. For all of them, Devon, Dr. Webb, Jonathan, Alessandro. I have photographs, Chloe. I have evidence. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or calculation, but her expression remained serene. She stood slowly, moving to the bar cart, where she poured herself a glass of wine with hands that remained perfectly steady. When she turned back to face him, her smile held a quality he'd never seen before, not seductive or charming or manipulative, but genuinely amused. "Oh, Victor," she said, shaking her head as if disappointed by his lack of sophistication. "You've been watching me perform for 3 years, and you still don't understand the show. I understand that you've been cheating on me with every man who walks through our door," he replied, his voice rising despite his efforts to maintain control. "I understand that you've been lying to me, betraying our marriage, making a fool of me while I stood by and pretended not to see." Chloe sipped her wine, considering his words with the detached interest of a theater critic reviewing a mediocre performance. "Cheating," she repeated, testing the word like an unfamiliar flavor. "Such a pedestrian term for what we've shared. Do you remember our story, Victor? Do you remember how we met?" The question caught him off guard, pulling him back to that charity gala where she'd been the most captivating woman in a room full of remarkable people. He'd been 50 years old, successful, but somehow diminished by the weight of his achievements, and she'd made him feel young again, dangerous again, alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. "You said I was your fairy tale," she continued, her voice taking on the dreamy quality she used when recounting their origin story. "The beautiful young woman who chose the powerful older man, who transformed his ordinary life into something magical. You wanted a wife who would surprise you, challenge you, make you feel special among all the other wealthy men with their predictable trophy wives." Victor felt the ground shifting beneath him, the familiar narrative of their relationship tilting at an angle that made everything look different. "I wanted a faithful wife," he said, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. "No," Chloe said, moving closer until she stood within arm's reach, her presence as magnetic as ever. "You wanted a performance, and that's exactly what I've given you." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with 3 years of unspoken truths and willful blindness. Victor stared at his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since their wedding day. She stood in their living room there, stage bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, and she had never looked more beautiful or more foreign to him. "Every season," Chloe continued, setting down her wine glass and moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed their view of the city, "you've watched me become someone new. The spiritual seeker, the wellness guru, the intellectual, the socialite, and now the artist. Each time, you've been fascinated, haven't you? Each time, you've fallen in love with the new version of me." Victor wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. Each transformation had reignited something in him, a sense of discovery and possession that made him feel like he was winning her all over again. Even as he'd suspected her infidelities, part of him had been thrilled by the woman she became, challenged by the effort required to keep up with her evolving self. "The affairs," she said, turning back to face him with eyes that held no shame, no regret, only a kind of clinical honesty. "They're just research, method acting, if you will. How can I authentically portray a yoga enthusiast without understanding the sensual connection between teacher and student? How can I embody wellness without exploring the intimate touch of a healer? How can I be a true intellectual without experiencing the meeting of minds and bodies that great literature celebrates?" The casualness of her explanation hit him like a physical blow. She spoke of betrayal as if it were a form of artistic commitment, adultery as if it were professional development. "And me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What am I in all of this?" "You're the audience," she said simply. "The most important part of any performance. Without you watching, admiring, desiring, there would be no point to any of it. You make it all real, Victor. Your love gives meaning to my transformations." She moved closer, and despite everything, the lies, the betrayals, the casual destruction of his trust, he felt the familiar pull of her gravity. She was still the most compelling person he'd ever known, still capable of making him feel like the protagonist in someone else's story. Every time you threatened divorce, Chloe whispered, reaching up to touch his face with fingers that had touched so many others. You remind me of our fairy tale, the successful businessman and his enchanting wife, living in their palace above the city, loving each other despite all the forces that should tear them apart. It's a beautiful story, don't you think? Victor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. When he opened them, Chloe was smiling at him with genuine affection, not performance, not manipulation, but something that might have been love if it hadn't been so calculating. I never needed to lie to you, she said, her voice soft with something that resembled tenderness. I just needed to perform, and you needed to believe in the performance, even when you knew it wasn't entirely real. That's what made it beautiful. In the end, he stayed, because she was right about the fairy tale, right about his need for the performance, right about the strange symbiosis they'd created between desire and deception. He stayed because leaving would mean admitting that the most captivating relationship of his life had been built on fiction, and he wasn't strong enough to face that truth. Now, 6 months later, Victor watches from their bedroom balcony as Chloe lounges by their infinity pool, her latest persona taking shape around her like morning mist. This season, she's exploring marine biology, her poolside reading consisting of oceanography texts and marine conservation manifestos. She's been texting with Dr. Marcus Rivera, a marine biologist from the local aquarium, their conversations growing longer and more frequent each day. She looks up from her phone and waves at Victor, her smile as radiant as ever, her wave as perfect, as if choreographed. He waves back, playing his part in their eternal performance. Watching her begin the next act of their ongoing play, the question that haunts him now, as he observes his wife planning what he knows will be her next affair, is whether he's become complicit in his own betrayal. By staying, by accepting, by continuing to play the role of devoted husband to her ever-changing wife, has he transformed from victim to collaborator? And if so, what does that make their marriage? A love story, a tragedy, or simply the most elaborate performance art piece ever created for an audience of one? As Chloe returns to her texting, her fingers dancing across the screen with practiced efficiency, Victor wonders, in a relationship built on performance and willing suspension of disbelief, who is really deceiving whom?